This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Briggman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project. With your host, Sal Briggman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillrite is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at fulfillrite.com. What up, crowdfunders? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Salvador Briggman, and on this show, we talk about Kickstarter, crowdfunding, raising money, strategies that work and that are proven to upgrade your crowdfunding game, whether that is launching a publishing project, launching a game, launching a new gadget or gizmo. We cover it all on this show. In today's episode, I talked with a Kickstarter campaigner that has raised over $150,000 for a publishing project. These are classic books reimagined through illustration. I'm going to let Joshua tell you a little bit about his project, but in this episode, you are going to learn, number one, why it is that you want to actually focus on something other than social media, something that's actually better than social media for driving pledges to your project. Number two, you're going to learn about some of the things you might not know when it comes to actually reward fulfillment and why this is so important for your project. And number three, how do you have a killer Kickstarter campaign, man, one that continues to raise funds, and how do you actually sort of gather that community around what it is that you're going to do? And you're going to discover that and more on today's podcast. But before we get into it, I really quickly want to say, number one, if you are interested in learning more about crowdfunding, I have a free course for you that will take you step by step through this, launching a campaign, raising money, how do you attract attention, all that stuff you can learn at this link, crowdcrux.com/crowdfunding. That is crowdcrux.com/crowdfunding. Just go to that link, enter your name and email, and you can get started on this free step-by-step course. In addition, I have an exciting announcement. And that announcement is that I came out and I'm coming out with a new free course on how to start, grow, and monetize a podcast. If you want to have a podcast just like mine, the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast, if you're interested in having a gaming show, interested in having any other kind of teaching podcast, maybe you're looking to teach about fitness or anything like that, or interview people in the same way that I do, I break down and I share some of the tricks that I've learned when it comes to podcasting, the secret behind a podcasting voice, and also low budget growth strategies. If you are interested in starting, growing, and monetizing your podcast, listen up for this link, crowdcrux.com/free podcasting course. That is crowdcrux.com/free podcasting course. Just enter your name and email there, and I will start sending you emails warming you up to some of these strategies and concepts when it comes to getting started with podcasting. Without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode and learn how this individual raised over $150,000 for a publishing project on Kickstarter. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Excited to bring you today to a project that has raised over $150,000 for a comic, basically, classic book reimagined through illustration. It's kind of like a combination between comics, it's kind of a combination between books. I'm going to let the creator tell you a little bit more about it because he can probably, describe it a lot better. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Salvador. Thanks for having me.
So could you describe what your project is a little bit to the listeners, and also maybe give us a little context, because I know you've created a few different projects on Kickstarter.
Yeah, so this line it's part of an ongoing series called Illuminated Editions, in which we take literary classics, novels, prose, poetry, and find like the greatest illustrators in the world to do lavishly illustrated editions of them. So they create a portfolio of illustration around something like Crime and Punishment or Peter Pan, and we produce them in these beautiful, oversized 9 by 12 inch hardcover slipcase editions. They're kind of hearkening back to the sort of beautiful, lavishly illustrated books that were very popular in the sort of Victorian era, the golden age of illustration, sort of trying to bring that level of craft and design and this sort of marriage of art and text into a sort of more modern context using more modern design sensibilities and the technologies that we have at our disposal now. So it's an ongoing thing. So we launched this series originally in 2017. We did a Kickstarter back then, which funded our first 3 titles in the series. We sent those out to backers just this past year. And now we're just wrapping up the second round of funding for Illuminated Edition. So we're funding 3 new titles, which are Peter Pan, Crime and Punishment, and this amazing 17th century, sort of sci-fi mindfuck by Margaret Cavendish called The Blazing World. It's totally amazing.
Very cool.
And the illustrators are Dave McKean, Brecht Evans, and Rebecca Dunlap, respectively.
And what was your role in this particular project?
Well, I sort of came up with the concept a few years ago, and I'm the publisher and editor, so I sort of work with my partner, Maëlle Delaveau, who is a designer and artist, and she does all the design work for the books. And so we sort of conceptualize them together, and we pick artists. And something that I think sort of sets apart part of what we're doing, not just in this line, but in general as a publisher, is it's very artist-driven. So we sort of find the artists that we want to work with, and we think the people we're working with are literally a lot of the best illustrators and cartoonists and graphic storytellers in the world. So we approach them, and we might have some ideas for books we would love to work with them on, but it's a real conversation sort of what they're interested in, what stories they like to tell. And then we see the final product as a real sort of collaborative effort, a collaboration across a century, where they're sort of working with this text and trying to sort of find their own way into it. It's a chance to sort of see these great stories through the eyes of these brilliant graphic storytellers. So you're sort of in between worlds in a really interesting way.
So what made you want to actually get started? I mean, back in 2017, what made you want to get started putting out these kinds of books, and kind of making that available to people out there who might not ever come across this kind of work?
Well, so this is sort of, I have a small press company with Maëlle. We're called Beehive Books. And this is sort of the type of thing we do. We really like illustration and comics and visual books and really interesting novel experimental ways of approaching the combination of text and images. We love really ambitious production and sort of books as objects, as the sort of, the actual printed object is as much a form of art as the content is. So we do a combination of monographs and graphic novels and artist books. And then this line of Illuminated Editions is sort of a smaller imprint within our larger Beehive Books umbrella.
When did Beehive Books start?
2016, we started Beehive.
Okay, so pretty recent.
7 Kickstarters since then.
Wow, you've been busy, man.
Yeah, it's true. I was in publishing before. I used to own a bookstore, and my partners and I.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. It was I was here for about 6.5 years, right here in Philly. It was mainly a comic shop, but we sold other stuff too. And so we started off, me and my partners there, Andrew Carl and Chris Stevens, doing some publishing projects through the shop. And so that was sort of how we first got into publishing as an industry. and that sort of gave me my first experiences. Then we closed the shop in 2016, and that's when I sort of transitioned hard into Beehive Books, and Mael and I started working together, and sort of tried to go into this publishing thing sort of full on.
Bookstores are a rare thing nowadays, so that's pretty cool. You used to own one and run a shop there. What got you into crowdfunding then? Because I think when we think of like traditional books and publishing and stuff, crowdfunding is kind of a newer thing when it comes to that. What got you into that?
Well, it's interesting. Like I feel like the model that we're using and the sort of vision we have for how we want to approach publishing are very intertwined with each other, because the book publishing trade is a pretty tough business these days. It's very hard to make a living there. Book sales are not what they used to be. But the great thing about crowdfunding is that things that would be incredible risks that take these days. I mean, doing gigantic, oversized books, really strange production, things that don't fit comfortably on a normal bookstore bookshelf. Those things can be sort of a death knell in traditional publishing, but on Kickstarter, there's a real appeal to them. And sort of our vision is these sort of unlikely projects, things that you don't find in other places. Like that's what gets me excited as a publisher, when I'm like, I've never seen anything like this. And that can be a real challenge from a sort of traditional sales standpoint, where your job is to sell to bookstores, because bookstores want to know that whatever they're going to pick up is definitely going to sell. So they want to be able to compare it to books that they've represented before. But when you're out there sort of on your own, like crowdfunding stuff and sort of presenting stuff to readers directly, and you're sort of able to tell a story about what you're doing, it allows you to do these really strange, ambitious things, and then that can fund the project, and then we're able to release the books in bookstores without having the same financial pressure where if the book doesn't sell, we're going to go out of business.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of cool that you can get in touch with like a micro community of people who want to see this thing exist in the world, and to have to go through like another agency or a middleman or something like that, that's not going to enable you to reach those people, because it maybe doesn't have the same mass appeal, but there is a large enough group of people out there that want to see this thing exist, whether that's 500 people or 800 people, and that can sort of fund the production run for that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, this model is not, I mean, the crowdfunding is still very new, but this type of model in publishing is a very old model. I mean, I collect sort of Victorian era illustrated novels, and a lot of them I noticed have like a page where they often like they say something like this book was produced by subscription, or they have a list of subscribers who bought the book, and so it's people who paid money before the book was produced. So a lot of these incredibly gorgeous, elaborately produced editions were by very small press publishers. So I started trying to figure out how that was possible. And it's basically the same thing. They would have a list of subscribers, mostly who were like local to wherever the publisher was based, who were interested in what this publisher was doing and sort of would prepay for these books. And often they would print their name in the books, just like a lot of Kickstarter projects do.
Fascinating.
So I didn't even know about that. It's sort of a traditional publishing model that has not been used, at least not very much, for a very long time. But so yeah, there's a sort of historical resonance there, which is interesting to me.
When it comes to running one of these campaigns, what I try to do with my work is basically sort of break this down into like a formula, or at least advice that people can follow. It seems like you've done a lot of different projects. Did you learn at all about crowdfunding, or is this kind of you just like putting out these projects and finding an audience on Kickstarter?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of learned by doing. We've definitely made a lot of mistakes on Kickstarter, and we sort of adjusted from there. I mean, especially with some of our older projects before I started Beehive. I feel like by the time I launched Beehive, I had done a bunch of Kickstarters with my previous company, and Mael had done some stuff on Kickstarter too. So we sort of had some experience by that point. But it's a weird and unique beast. Crowdfunding is a very specific thing that has its own virtues and its own challenges.
Would you be willing to share maybe one of those mistakes or one of those lessons that you've learned about crowdfunding specifically?
Sure. There are so many, it's hard to pick. I mean, things with shipping can screw you over so easily. Like you have to figure out exactly how you're going to get these products to people and how much that's going to cost you and how much shipping to different countries costs, how you're doing packaging, what kind of envelopes you're using, what the size of the packages is going to be. Like you really... I feel like that's one area where it's the easiest to just totally screw yourself over and not have enough money at the end of the project. Because I mean, we do a lot of very big, oversized books. I mean, with Locust, I did a book that was 16 by 21 inches. It's like massive. And so it's a 10-pound book, and it's like the size of like a large child. And so you're mailing this stuff all over the world, and like shipping for that project was like over $20,000, just shipping costs, because we have a lot of international backers. And
there's also like other editions and stuff, and like maybe you have a postcard, or like you also maybe have other rewards, that factor into that.
Oh my God! Again, an area in which we've made so many mistakes, just not optimizing like how to make sure you have all the stuff and make sure everything, like that's another big one, is like making sure everything goes in the same package, or if it doesn't, make sure you're charging enough that you have to ship multiple packages and pay for like shipping supplies for multiple packages. Like a lot of people will just add on a t-shirt and be like, okay, yeah, you got a shirt with the thing, but then the shirt doesn't go in the same box. So it's like a poster is long and it doesn't fit in the same box with the book. So you have to be ready for all that stuff. It can really get you into trouble.
Do you use any of these like tools that are out there, like BackerKit survey managers, or like a fulfillment company?
I do. I use BackerKit, which I really like. I don't use a fulfillment company. I do all the fulfillment myself. But BackerKit for sort of back end organization has been really great. It's not cheap, but it's been worth the money for us, because part of the advantage is BackerKit gives you an opportunity to sell more stuff, to sort of turn it into a little web store for your backers.
Yeah.
So
true.
kind of for us, it's kind of paid for itself that way. But yeah, Kickstarter is great, but it does not offer you a lot in terms of organizational tools.
I had to interrupt this podcast episode because I want to introduce you to my friends at The Gadget Flow. Their product discovery platform reaches 22 million people per month. They've helped more than 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns thus far, and they have a social media following of more than 700,000 followers. If you want to gain access to their marketplace and list your own product, you can go to thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. When it comes to those like lessons that you learn, so the first one is making sure that you bring out the Excel spreadsheet, that you start to think a little bit about the fulfillment phase, and also like how are you going to package these things, how are you going to ship them, how you can get them to international countries, what's it going to cost you. What's another lesson that you've learned from doing these different projects?
Be careful with stretch goals. That's another big one. It's easy to get really excited when you've hit your goal and you think you're going to go above it, and to come up with big plans for what kind of stuff you're going to add or what other things you're going to produce, because you sort of never know what's going to happen. And you have to remember that you have to produce more stuff now, because you went over your goal. So you probably need to print more books, which is going to cost you money. Kickstarter is going to take 10%. You're going to have to pay taxes on all this stuff. And then, so if you do a stretch goal that's you think it's going to cost you half of the extra money that you made, that you may end up sort of spending almost all of the extra money that you made. And then it's just a bunch of work for you, and you don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah. So being aware of what you're offering.
We had a really bad experience on our very first Kickstarter we ever did. It was a tiny little Kickstarter. It was I used to edit a magazine called Quarter Moon, and it was to fund an issue of Quarter Moon. I think we were trying to raise, I don't know, $1,000 or $2,000 or something, and we went pretty easily over it. We funded very quickly, and so we had a stretch goal where it was if we get to 5,000, or I'm getting the numbers wrong, but it's something like this. We get to 5,000, we will reprint this old comic that we did that's been out of print for a long time, and we'll send that to people too. That'll just be an added bonus. And we got one crazy, like what seemed like an angel backer who just donated $2,500 and just
Wow.
picked the like $100 reward tier. So we're like, awesome. So we, in the midst of this Kickstarter, we were trying to fulfill very quickly. So we paid to reprint this old comic, and then that person's credit card was declined.
Oh my gosh. What?
So we ended up basically spending all of the money we raised on that Kickstarter to produce this other comic that wasn't even the thing that we were trying to fund.
Do you think that was like a troll or something? Like, or was that just?
I think it was. I think it was a troll. I think it was somebody messing with us.
Oh man.
Which is like baffling and strange, but what are you going to do? And ultimately, we did raise enough that it didn't, like it wasn't brutal for us. I mean, it didn't mean that we went like $1,000 out of pocket or anything, but it basically took away all of our profit.
Yeah, that's just foul play. I mean, man.
Dreadful.
On the marketing front, I'd be kind of curious here because I think publishing is a bit of a different category. Have you learned anything in the way of marketing these different projects and sort of introducing these kinds of books to an audience that maybe doesn't already follow you?
Yeah, I mean, we work very hard to sort of create a real connection with the people who back us, because we sort of look at them as, I mean, they are literally the people who are making these projects possible. So we sort of look at them almost as co-creators of the projects, because they're sort of voting with their hard-earned money to make these things able to be produced. So we've sort of just tried to build our audience one by one and really hang on to them, and to sort of treat them like a community and a family and like a group of people, like-minded people who are really engaged in this project of making these unlikely books possible. We want these things to exist in the world, and we're so excited that there are people who feel the same way we do, who feel the same kind of passion and are willing to spend money on a lot of our projects are pretty expensive books.
They're beautiful though. I mean, like the illustration, the quality, it looks like even of the paper, like these are really high quality books.
Appreciate that. I mean, we go all out. We don't spare any expense, and we don't spare any of our own effort. I mean, we just care about these things so much. We lavish so much love and attention on these books. We want them to be as magical as humanly possible, and we care about our contributors so much. Yeah, I mean,
you basically try to make the best product possible, and you try to, engage that community, those people that are your backers, they're pledging their money and making sure that they get what they want out of it, and making sure they have a good experience, basically. One of the kind of like weird things I noticed, so with a lot of different projects, we sort of see them become overfunded. Like they are setting like a 30K goal and then end up raising like 60K or 70K. It looks like with a lot of your projects, it's more like you're setting the amount you need and then you end up raising that amount. Do you think is that just like how the publishing category works, or is that like specific to your projects?
No, I mean, we've had mixed results. We have had projects that overfunded a lot. I mean, the first big Kickstarter project we ever did was before Beehive. This was when I still had the bookstore. We did a tribute to Little Nemo in Slumberland, which was this like giant oversized hardcover that had like 120 contributing artists or something, because they all did a page, and it had a lot of very popular, really famous artists who have big fan bases in it. So we were trying to raise $50,000 on that one, and we ended up raising $150,000. And then, our first one with Beehive was The Temple of Silence, which is an art book about this unknown artist, Herbert Crowley. And we were trying to raise 50 on that one. We raised 96, I think. But I don't think it's necessarily the category. I think like it just depends on the project. It just depends on how much interest there is in it. Our projects in particular have a pretty consistent number of backers. The amount of money that we raise might vary really wildly. I mean, we've done projects where we raised $20,000 and projects where we raised $170,000. But that is less a function of number of backers than it is like the price of the product. Because virtually, I don't think we've ever done a project that has had less than 500 backers, and I don't think we've ever done one that's had more than 1,000. So
that's
we're sort of
sweet spot there. Yeah,
that's sort of our range, and so it's like, and I think we're getting I'm hoping, as we keep growing, we can grow the size of our audience and get more backers. But right now we sort of have more of like a model of how this thing works, knowing we're going to get there's a range there. That's 500 to 1,000.
You've really like
different.
narrowed in on your audience, who they are, the size. Now you're working to grow that among these different projects.
Budget out like how much we think we're going to need to raise for this thing, and it's feasible if we think we can do that by selling 600 copies. So I think that's why a lot of our more recent projects have been, they may overfund by a little bit, but they're pretty close to. We basically raise what we expect to raise because we're getting a little more consistent about knowing how many people we're going to get.
So let me ask you a question here about like the middle point with your project, because there's this thing that we call the Kickstarter slump of death. And that's kind of like after the first week and a half where your momentum is kind of slowing and it's getting more difficult to get people excited and like amped up about the project. What are you doing during that period to keep getting more and more backers with your projects? Like, are you doing social media? Are you blasting to the email list? Like, how are you getting through that period and continuing to grow with your project?
Yeah, I don't know if we've necessarily defeated the slump. We definitely have, just like most projects do, like a lull in the middle usually. But we're very we promote these things like crazy. I mean, we post on social media every day. It's a tricky balance to figure out how much you want to share without like spamming people. I generally like send out a mailing list we have a pretty good email list. That's where most of our backers come from, usually, is that email list. So I try to only send out 2 emails per Kickstarter. Depending on the Kickstarter, maybe I'll send out 3, but usually I just send one at the beginning of the project and then send another one in like the last 24 hours. Mm-hmm. But then in between, posting on social media all the time. I mean, it's nice we're doing visual stuff. So usually there's a lot of images to share, which are interesting to people. So we post on Instagram every day. So, I mean, like just try to really give people value, not just remind them that you have a Kickstarter. Because it does get annoying when you see someone just posting about their Kickstarter every 20 minutes for a month.
Yeah. I think it's almost like nowadays, even if you're doing something more, I guess, in the old school of like creating a book or you're an author, you really just can't afford not to be on social media or to be at least sharing bits of your story there, even if you don't use it personally. Because I know a lot of people who hate social media. Like, it just plagues your day. It takes you out of the moment. I'd rather be reading a book. I don't want to be on social media. But
I sort of need social media.
Yeah.
But it's you.
For business, though, it's like invaluable, from that
definitely.
Marketing standpoint.
And I'm not even sure necessarily how many backers we get from social media directly, but I do think it reminds people that we're there and creates like a presence of Beehive books in their sort of mental landscape. Because one of the great things about Kickstarter is that you can see where all your clicks are coming from. And by far, email is like way more effective for us in terms of directly creating sales. Like email does that much more effectively than any social media does, in our experience.
To what degree do you think these different other projects you've done, like the community has spilled over to keep funding these new projects you're launching?
It's pretty consistent. Most of our projects, it's like usually, I don't know, like at least 50, usually more like 70 to 75% of our backers have backed us before.
Wow. That's awesome.
So we might get 100 or 200 or 250 new backers. But there's a pretty consistent community. I mean, every project we do, we really try to like over deliver on what people are expecting. And I think we've done that pretty repeatedly, to the point where people expect a lot from us, I think.
Definitely.
We're really trying to hang on to our audience because they've enabled us to do all of this incredibly exciting stuff.
I'm speaking to the crowdfunders in the audience who have already launched a Kickstarter campaign, or have actually even successfully run a campaign. And the reason is, I think you will understand this pain point most. And that is, when you finally do raise money on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, The hardest part is not collecting the cash. The hardest part is shipping out all of those perks and rewards to your backers. It is a nightmare, my friends. It's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of stress. That's why I recommend BackerKit. If you have not heard of BackerKit, they help you collect surveys, they help you collect data, and the entire fulfillment process is just so much easier and so many less spreadsheets when you use their software. You can check them out at backerkit.com and use CrowdCrux for a special discount. I just have like one or two more questions for you here. And I also want to, talk more about the project and where people can go and check that out. But before we did, I just wanted to ask you personally, I mean, being able to do this for a living, having basically a publishing company where you're getting books out there that you want to see exist in the world, that's freaking cool, man. What does it feel like to be living like that is your day-to-day life?
It's amazing. I feel so grateful that I get to do this work. I mean, it's stuff that excites me so much. I'm so thrilled that I get to work on these projects, get to work with these like incredible people. These artists are like, every artist we work with is a legitimate genius. And I can't believe that I get to spend my time like trying to usher these things into the world, and specifically trying to create projects that, I mean, like when we sit down with an artist who we would like to work with, our first question is usually like, what is the craziest project that you want to do that you don't think any publisher would ever do with you?
Yeah.
Like, and so, I mean, we're not always able to do the thing that they say, but that's our goal, is to take the thing that seems impossible or improbable and find a way to make it happen. And it's like this sort of riddle that you have to crack. Like, okay, how do you make a model where this thing can work? So yeah, I mean, it's a tough business. It's hard to make a living doing this stuff. But I feel so grateful every day that I get to work on projects that just excite me so much. And when you get those first proofs or those first advanced copies, and you can hold the book in your hand, you're like, this thing is actually real. There's just no feeling like it.
On that sort of front of it being a tough business, if there is a someone out there interested in starting their own publishing company, or they're interested in being an author, do you have any advice for them? Think maybe something that you wish you had done when you were getting started, or something you would do differently when it comes to crowdfunding or just starting your own business there.
I mean, this is a really mundane answer, but it's something I strongly wish that someone had told me when I first started, or maybe someone did tell me and I just didn't listen. But collect email addresses, which is like a thing a lot of people just don't do. And I didn't start doing it until years into doing this stuff. I mean, I would go to comic conventions all the time, and it's so embarrassing to me how many years I was out there selling books to people and just hoping that they follow you on Twitter or whatever, and you just never even ask for their email address. Because, like on social media, you're totally at the mercy of the algorithms of these big companies who want you to spend money. And you really have very little control over your interactions with people. Whereas email is just direct. It's just like there's a point-to-point thing. If people are interested in you, they can follow you, and you can talk to them directly. And that email is really a big part of where we've built our committed audience. Like we get a lot of like clicks on our newsletters that we send. We try not to send them too often because we don't want people to like feel like we're over marketing. But yeah, it's just a simple thing, which I'm amazed how many people just don't ever do it, because everyone's so locked into social media. Email is so much better than social media.
Well, I think the other reason why it's so much better is you see so much more way in terms of click-throughs. So like if you have 1,000 Facebook fans versus 1,000 email subscribers, you're going to have way more people on the email list actually checking out the project than who follow you on Facebook. So just percentage-wise,
Yeah, when we send out an email blast, like almost a third of our mailing list usually clicks through on it, which is like when you send out a Facebook update, a third of your audience won't even see it. It'll just never even cross their timeline, because who knows how these algorithms work. But yeah, it's such a higher level of engagement, and it seems kind of old fashioned to people. I think people are just so into the new stuff and these cool apps email seems a little old fashioned. It doesn't seem as exciting, but it's just so much more effective than anything else, and nobody else owns it.
Well said. Well, this is a lot of good educational information. Thank you so much for sharing this. I want to give you an opportunity here. Where can people go and learn a bit more about your project, and also some of the new publishing campaigns you might be having come out?
Well, I mean, they can go to beehivebooks.com to see a lot of what we're working on. If you go to beehivebooks.com/illuminated, that'll link you directly to our Kickstarter. And so we're in the, I don't know when this podcast is going to run. So our Kickstarter may or may not be over by that point. It ends on Thursday, May 6th, which is just 2 days from now as we record this. So,
okay. Will you be on going? Do you go on like Indiegogo, or do you go on like a pre-order after Kickstarter?
Yeah, we'll upload everything to our website, and you can pre-order stuff directly from beehivebooks.com. You can order any of the books that we've published already, and you can order the three that we'll start working on once we're funded.
Great, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of these words of wisdom for other publishers that might be out there interested in raising money on Kickstarter or with crowdfunding, and also sharing some things I didn't even know about, like old school crowdfunding. I guess the way that these books used to be created, and some of the books that might be the outliers or might be like the misfits, but they're actually pretty freaking cool. And there's a bunch of people out there that want to see it exist. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Salvador. It's nice to talk to you.
Let me tell you about our latest sponsor, SendPro Online by Pitney Bowes. Shipping can be complex. Things can get really confusing really fast. With SendPro Online, it's easy to save time and money no matter what you send, from letters and packages to overnights and flats. You can easily compare USPS, UPS, and FedEx in an all-in-one online tool. You can print shipping labels and stamps directly from your printer. You can even track all of your shipments and get email notifications when they've arrived. SendPro Online is only $14.99 a month, and listeners can get a free 30-day trial when you visit pb.com/crowdcrux. That's pb.com/crowdcrux. Experience the convenience of SendPro Online for yourself when you sign up for a free 30-day trial. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman, of course, and thank you so much for listening and tuning in to today's show. I hope you got some nuggets that you can take out, you can apply to your own Kickstarter campaign, your own crowdfunding or Indiegogo project. And in addition, if you would like to get started on the right foot, I have a free step-by-step crowdfunding course for you. All you got to do is enter your name and email address, and I will start sending you some emails, getting you warmed up to some of these different strategies that can actually get you pledges. Things that you can do to make sure that you are successful when it comes to Kickstarter, when it comes to any publishing, any category out there, whether that's publishing, gaming, gadgets, gizmos, really anything can apply. Anyone out there can apply these strategies, even if you are a beginner and you have literally never launched a campaign before in your life. That link to check this out is crowdcrux.com/crowdfunding. That is crowdcrux.com/crowdfunding. Enter that link, go to your browser, and you'll pull up this free course. Just enter your name and email. In addition, if you are interested in learning from me in terms of how to set up your own podcast, if you want to kind of get the inside track there in how I've been able to transform my podcasting voice, how to sound better, how to have more resonance and volume, also some of the strategies and techniques that you can use to supercharge your own podcast, and some low budget growth strategies, I share that and more in this free course, which will show you how to start, grow, and monetize your own podcast. Podcasting has been exploding, man. Like, there's so many new shows coming out. I think it's incredibly profitable. It's done wonders for my business. It's also a lot of freaking fun just to interview people, to understand them, and to have and produce really cool educational or even some informational shows where people are learning how to do things. If you want to have more of like a entertainment style podcast where like you're riffing on different political topics, you're talking about gaming, whatever it is, there is a podcast out there for whatever you are interested in, and you can now create your own. So I'm going to give you a link to get started learning about podcasting. This link is crowdcrux.com/free podcasting course.
That is crowdcrux.com/free podcasting course. crowdcrux.com/free podcasting course. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your time. I hope you take a second to dive into my archives, listen to some of the other incredible entrepreneurs out there when it comes to crowdfunding, and I will see you next time.